The lagging shadow. It started subtly, the kind of thing you barely notice and immediately dismiss. I work late often, walking home through the emptying city streets as dusk settles into night. Streetlights cast long, dancing shadows, and mine always stretched out ahead or trailed behind me, a familiar, dark companion. The first time I thought something was wrong was under the flickering orange glow of a particularly old streetlight near my apartment building. As I walked beneath it, my shadow stretched long in front of me. But as I moved out of the direct light, I caught a fleeting impression in my peripheral vision. It felt like my shadow lingered for a fraction of a second longer than it should have before snapping back to its normal position behind me. Like a visual echo, or lag. Weird, I thought, glancing back. Just the empty sidewalk and the buzzing lamp. I shrugged it off. Tired eyes, tricky lighting. But then it happened again a few nights later, this time in the long, fluorescent-lit hallway of my office building after everyone else had gone home. I turned a corner, and my shadow, cast sharply on the wall ahead, seemed to hesitate for a split second before catching up to my movement. It was so brief, so easy to doubt. Was I just imagining the delay? Over the next few weeks, I became hyper-aware of my shadow. In the low light of my living room lamp, walking past shop windows at night, under the stark lights of the subway platform. Not always, not even often, but sometimes, that slight, almost imperceptible lag. It was like watching a poorly synced video feed, where the audio, my movement, was just slightly ahead of the visual, my shadow's movement. I started doing little tests, feeling foolish. I'd wave my hand quickly, watching its shadow on the wall. Most times, it was perfectly synchronized. But occasionally, the shadow hand would complete the motion a hair's breadth behind my real one. I'd stop abruptly while walking, and sometimes, just sometimes, the silhouette on the pavement felt like it slid to a halt a moment after I did. The rational part of my brain kept insisting it was eye strain, fatigue, tricks of light and perspective. But a cold knot of anxiety was tightening in my stomach. It felt wrong. Shadows are supposed to be instantaneous, exact copies of the object casting them. Mine wasn't always behaving. Then came the realization that was worse than the lag. One evening, walking down a quiet residential street with widely spaced streetlights, my shadow was cast long and thin before me. I stopped, watching it. And as I stared, I realized it wasn't just lagging sometimes, it wasn't quite mine. The proportions felt subtly off. The head seemed slightly too large, the shoulders a bit too narrow. It mimicked my stance, but it was like a distorted reflection. My breath caught in my throat. I raised my right hand slowly. The shadow on the pavement raised its corresponding hand, but perhaps it was the angle, perhaps it was my fear, but the shadow hand looked longer, the fingers thinner than my own. I quickly lowered my arm, heart pounding. I started walking again, faster now, not daring to look directly at the dark shape keeping pace ahead of me. It felt like something separate, something else that was just tethered to my feet. The true terror hit last night. I was home, in my apartment. I'd turned off the main living room light, leaving only a dim lamp on in the corner, casting long shadows across the floor and wall. I walked from the kitchen towards my bedroom. My shadow stretched out onto the plain wall beside the bedroom door. I stopped in the hallway, my back to the wall casting the shadow. I could see it clearly in my peripheral vision. It stopped when I stopped. But then, as I stood perfectly still, staring straight ahead towards my bedroom, the shadow on the wall moved. It didn't mimic me. It slowly, deliberately, turned its head. The dark silhouette on the wall rotated its featureless profile to face me, even though I was still facing forward. I gasped, stumbling back, fumbling for the main light switch on the hallway wall. The instant the bright overhead light flooded the space, the shadow snapped back to normal, a perfect, still silhouette matching my stance. But the image of that shadowed head turning, independent of my own body, was burned into my mind. I slept with every light in the apartment on last night. Today, the sun is shining, and my shadow behaves perfectly normally, mimicking my every move without flaw. But I can't shake the feeling. I find myself constantly checking it, avoiding dimly lit rooms, feeling a surge of panic whenever I walk under a streetlight at night. Because I know that sometimes, when the light is low and I'm not watching closely enough, my shadow doesn't quite keep up. And I have the sickening feeling that it's not mine anymore, and I don't know what happens when it finally detaches completely. The Window Watcher. My name is Liam, and I moved into the old Carmine building seeking solitude and a good view. Apartment 4B offered both. It was on the 4th floor, overlooking a narrow, cobblestone alleyway that separated my building from the slightly taller, more ornate brick building opposite. My bedroom window, a large sash affair that rattled in heavy winds, faced directly onto a similar window in the building across the way. Most days, that window remained dark or covered by heavy, drawn curtains. I appreciated the privacy. The building itself had character, the kind that comes with age. Creaking floorboards were standard, the plumbing occasionally groaned like a disgruntled ghost, and drafts whispered under the doors. I found it charming, a welcome change from the sterile silence of modern complexes. I worked mostly from home as a freelance editor, so the quiet was a bonus. For the first month, everything was peaceful. I settled into a routine, enjoyed the shafts of morning light through my large window, and grew accustomed to the building's gentle groans. The window opposite remained unremarkable, sometimes lit dimly from within, sometimes dark, sometimes curtained. I paid it little mind. The first time I saw him, or it, I still don't know, was on a Tuesday night, very late. I'd been struggling with a difficult manuscript and had gotten up to stretch my legs, walking over to the window to look down at the rain-slicked alley. That's when I noticed a light was on in the window directly across from mine. Not unusual. But standing framed within it was a figure. It was just a silhouette against the faint interior light. Tall, thin, perfectly motionless. My first thought was simply that a neighbor was up late, perhaps looking out at the rain too. But something felt off. The stillness was absolute. Not the stillness of someone pausing to look, but the rigid stillness of a statue or a mannequin. I watched for a minute or two, expecting some movement, a shift in weight, a turn of the head. Nothing. The figure remained perfectly fixed, facing my window. Feeling a sudden, irrational unease, I stepped back, letting my own curtain fall partially closed. I told myself it was nothing. People stand at windows. Maybe they were lost in thought. I went back to work, but the image lingered. A few nights later, I saw the figure again. Same window, same time, well after midnight. Same unnatural stillness. This time, the light behind it was even dimmer, making the silhouette sharper, darker. I felt a prickle run down my spine. Was this the same person? Why were they always standing there, so late, so still, facing my apartment? I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was someone with insomnia. Maybe they had a particular spot they liked to stand. Maybe it wasn't even a person, perhaps a coat rack near the window, or a peculiar lamp casting a human-like shadow. But the shape seemed too defined, too intentionally placed. Over the next few weeks, the sightings became more frequent, though still sporadic. Always late at night. Always the same window. Always the same motionless silhouette. My initial curiosity curdled into a low-grade anxiety. I started feeling watched. I'd find myself glancing at my own window nervously, even during the day when the opposite window was dark or curtained. I began closing my own curtains earlier, blocking the view, but the feeling didn't entirely go away. It felt like closing the curtains just meant I couldn't see it, not that it couldn't see me. One night, driven by a mix of fear and frustration, I decided to try something. The figure was there, a dark sentinel in the lit frame across the alley. Taking a deep breath, I stood directly in my own window, fully visible, and waved my hand slowly. The silhouette didn't react. No wave back, no step away from the window, no dimming of the light. It remained utterly, unervingly still. I waved again, more emphatically. Nothing. It was like waving at a photograph. A cold dread seeped into me. This wasn't normal behavior. I started trying to learn more. I asked my neighbor down the hall, Mrs. Petrova, an elderly woman who had lived in the Carmine building for decades, about the building opposite. "Oh, the Ainsworth building," she'd said, peering at me over her glasses. "Quiet folks over there, mostly. Keep to themselves. Some artists, I think." "Why do you ask, dear?" "I just, sometimes see someone standing in one of the windows late at night," I said, trying to sound casual. "Fourth floor, facing my bedroom." She frowned slightly. "Fourth floor facing this way. Most of those are offices now, I thought. Or maybe storage. Not sure anyone actually lives in that specific unit right across. Been empty a while, I heard." My blood ran cold. "Empty? Are you sure?" I pressed. "I definitely see a light on sometimes, and a figure." She shrugged, her attention already drifting. "Could be mistaken, dear. Old buildings, funny layouts. Maybe it's maintenance, or someone just passing through. Wouldn't worry about it." But I did worry. Her words amplified my fear. If the unit was supposed to be empty, who or what was standing in that window, night after night? My paranoia grew. I bought a cheap pair of binoculars, hoping to get a clearer view, to see features, anything that would make the figure seem human. The next time I saw it, I raised the binoculars to my eyes, my hands shaking. Through the lenses, the figure remained stubbornly indistinct. The light behind it seemed to create a glare, blurring any details. It was still just a tall, thin shape, dark and featureless. But as I focused, trying desperately to make out a face or clothing, the light in the room across the alley abruptly went out, plunging the window into darkness. I lowered the binoculars, my heart pounding. Coincidence? Or did it know I was trying to see it more clearly? I started sleeping poorly. Every creak of my apartment sounded like footsteps. I'd wake up suddenly, convinced someone was in the room, only to find myself alone, the silence pressing in. I kept my curtains tightly drawn at night, but it felt like a flimsy defense. The feeling of being observed was pervasive. Sometimes, I'd stand near the curtained window and just listen, imagining the figure standing silently across the alley, hidden by the fabric, still watching. One rainy Thursday night, I couldn't stand it anymore. The feeling of being watched was suffocating. I hadn't seen the figure for a few nights, and a sliver of hope mingled with my dread. Maybe it was gone. Maybe it had all been in my head. Around 1 a.m., I pulled back a corner of my curtain, just an inch, and peered out. The alley was dark, slick with rain. The window opposite was completely black. Relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. It was just dark. Empty. I let the curtain fall back, took a deep breath, and turned towards my bed. As I did, my gaze swept across the rain-streaked glass of my own window. And reflected faintly in the darkness, superimposed over the view of the alley, was the silhouette. It wasn't across the alley anymore. It was standing behind me, inside my room, reflected in the glass. Tall, thin, unnaturally still. I didn't scream. I couldn't. A strangled gasp escaped my lips as I spun around. The room was empty. Just my bed, my dresser, the familiar shadows. Nothing there. I scrambled for the light switch, flooding the room with harsh, bright light. Empty. Utterly empty. But the image in the reflection, it had been so clear, so undeniably there for that split second. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my bed, fully clothed, lights blazing, until the first gray light of dawn crept through the window. I didn't look towards the window again. I broke my lease the next day. I paid the penalty without arguing. I packed my essentials in a frantic haze, feeling eyes on my back the entire time. I didn't tell Mr. Henderson the real reason. I mumbled something about a job offer in another city. I live somewhere else now, somewhere modern and sterile, with windows that face a busy street, not a quiet alley. But I never feel entirely safe. Sometimes, when I catch my reflection unexpectedly in a dark windowpane at night, my heart seizes. I half expect to see that tall, thin silhouette standing silently behind me, just out of focus, waiting. The watcher from the window might be gone from my view, but I'm terrified it hasn't stopped watching. The overnight adjustments. I've always been meticulous. Some might say obsessively neat. Everything in my small apartment has its place. Books are arranged by height on the shelf, mugs hang facing the same direction, remote controls sit parallel on the coffee table. It's not just about tidiness, it brings me a sense of calm, of order in a chaotic world. That's why it started bothering me so much. The blinds. I used to think my apartment was boringly normal. Third floor, beige carpets, thin walls where you could sometimes hear the neighbor's muffled TV. It's small, just a living room, kitchen alcove, bedroom, bathroom. The best part, I thought, was the sliding glass door in the living room leading to a narrow balcony. It faced west, so the afternoon sun could be brutal. That's why I always, kept the vertical blinds fully closed when I left for work. It was automatic, like locking the door. Pull the chain, hear the clack 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 as the slats rotated shut, then give the cord a tug to make sure they stayed that way. It started about a month after I moved in. I came home from work one Tuesday, tired, juggling groceries. I unlocked the door, stepped inside, and froze. The living room blinds were open. Not wide open, but tilted, maybe halfway, letting stripes of late afternoon sun cut across the floor. My first thought was, did I forget? I was sure I hadn't. It felt wrong, like walking into your house and finding a chair moved slightly. Unsettling, but explainable. I closed them firmly, double-checked the cord mechanism, and told myself I was just tired. A few days later, it happened again. This time, one section of the blinds, maybe 5 or 6 slats worth, was rotated completely open, offering a clear view of the building opposite. My stomach tightened. I knew I hadn't left them like that. I checked the door, locked. The windows were latched from the inside. Nothing was missing, nothing seemed disturbed. Except the blinds. I started paying closer attention. Every morning, I made a ritual of closing them, listening to the distinct sound, tugging the cord. Every evening, I'd hold my breath as I unlocked my door, my eyes immediately flicking to the living room window. Some days, they were fine. Other days, they'd be slightly open. Once, they were rotated almost fully open, bathing the room in light I specifically tried to avoid. The rational part of my brain scrambled for answers. Maybe the tension cord was slipping. I tested it repeatedly, it held firm. A draft? The windows were sealed, and it happened even on still days. Maintenance? The landlord swore no one had been in my apartment. They always gave 24 hours notice unless it was an emergency, and there hadn't been one. The feeling shifted from annoying to creepy. It felt deliberate. Like someone was subtly letting me know they could get in, or that something inside was messing with them. I checked closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. Nothing. Just the quiet hum of the fridge and the faint city sounds outside. I told a friend about it. He laughed. Dude, your apartment's haunted by a ghost who hates room darkening blinds. Funny, but it didn't help the knot in my gut. That's when I bought the camera. A cheap little Wi-Fi security camera. I set it on the bookshelf opposite the window, angled perfectly to see the blinds. I felt a surge of determination. I'd catch whatever it was, a faulty mechanism, a weird reflection, something. The first day, I checked the live feed obsessively from work. Nothing. The blinds stayed perfectly closed. I came home, reviewed the footage, hours of stillness. I felt a bit foolish, but also relieved. Maybe setting up the camera had somehow stopped it. For 3 days, nothing happened. The blinds remained shut. I started to relax, thinking the problem, whatever it was, had resolved itself. On the 4th day, I came home late. As soon as I opened the door, I knew. The blinds were tilted open again, maybe a third of the way. My heart hammered against my ribs. I rushed to the bookshelf. The camera's little blue light was off. I checked the app on my phone, camera offline. I picked it up. The battery was dead. I distinctly remembered plugging it in the night before. Did the power cord slip out? I checked the outlet. The cord was lying on the floor beside it, completely unplugged. A cold wave washed over me. There were no pets, no kids, no earthquakes. How does a plug just fall out of a socket? I scanned the room, my skin prickling. It felt different now. Not just weird, but invasive. Someone, or something, didn't want to be seen. I plugged the camera back in, making sure the connection was tight. I even put a piece of tape over the plug to hold it in place. I felt watched the entire time, though the apartment was silent except for my own ragged breathing. The next day, I checked the feed constantly. It stayed online. Blinds closed. Everything normal. I came home, my shoulders aching with tension. The blinds were still closed. Relief flooded me, so intense it almost made me dizzy. I checked the footage anyway. Hours of nothing. Stillness. Then, around 3:17 p.m. in the recording, the feed suddenly cut out. Just black screen. Camera offline. I went to the camera. It was still plugged in, tape secure. But the device itself was off. The physical power button on the side had been pressed. My blood ran cold. That button requires a deliberate push. I looked at the blinds. They were closed. Nothing had happened to them this time. But the camera, it had been turned off remotely. Or by someone physically present who hadn't touched the blinds. Neither option made sense. Neither felt safe. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building, every distant siren, made me jump. I kept imagining fingers pressing that small power button, unseen. It's been 2 weeks since then. The blinds have moved twice more. Just slight rotations, never fully open. The camera? It stays online some days. Other days, I come home to find it inexplicably turned off, the little power button clicked silent. There's never anything on the footage leading up to it cutting out. Just my empty living room, then nothing. I don't know what's happening. Is someone getting in? How? Why just move the blinds and turn off the camera? Why not take anything? Is it something wrong with the apartment itself, some bizarre electrical surge or static charge affecting the blinds and the camera? Or is it something else? I feel like I'm being toyed with. The silence of the apartment feels heavy now, charged. I dread coming home. I find myself staring at the blinds, wondering if they'll move while I'm watching. They never do. It only happens when I'm gone, or when the camera mysteriously fails. I haven't called the police. What would I say? My blinds move and my camera turns off. They'd think I was crazy. Maybe I am. But every time I unlock my door and see those familiar slats tilted just wrong, a primal fear grips me. It's the feeling of your safest space being subtly, inexplicably violated. And the worst part? I still don't know what happens when the camera goes dark. The sound from the drain. It started subtly. So subtly, I dismissed it for weeks. Living alone in an older apartment building means you get used to odd noises, pipes groaning, the elevator humming, the distant rumble of traffic. But this was different. It only happened late at night, usually after midnight, when the building was tomb silent. And it only happened when I was in the bathroom. The first time, I thought it was water dripping somewhere deep in the walls. A faint, rhythmic plink, plink, plink. I checked the faucet, the shower head, the toilet tank. Nothing. I shrugged it off. Old building, old plumbing. A few nights later, it was back. But it wasn't dripping this time. It was softer, more like a faint, breathy sigh or a very low hum, almost below the threshold of hearing. It seemed to be coming from the shower drain. I knelt on the cold tile, ear close to the metal grate. The air smelled faintly damp and metallic. The sound was definitely there, a low, uneven hum, like someone trying to hold a single note but running out of breath. It stopped the moment I shone my phone flashlight down the drain. Darkness, tiny hairs, soap scum. Nothing else. Again, I rationalized. Air pressure changes. Sound carrying from another apartment through the pipes. It seemed unlikely, but less unlikely than the alternative my brain was starting to whisper. Then it began to sound like singing. Not real singing, not a clear melody. More like fragments of a tune, hummed in that same low, breathy way. It was always the same broken little phrase, maybe 3 or 4 notes, repeated over and over. It was so quiet, I had to hold my breath to hear it over my own heartbeat. The tune itself felt vaguely familiar, like a half-forgotten nursery rhyme, but warped, dragged down into something slow and unsettling. This is when the real unease set in. Air pressure doesn't hum lullabies. I started timing my showers for the morning, avoiding the bathroom late at night. But sometimes you have to go. One night, standing at the sink brushing my teeth, I heard it again. That fragmented, breathy tune drifting up from the shower drain across the small room. My hand froze mid-brush. The humming continued, unwavering. It felt expectant. I spat quickly, rinsed my mouth, and backed out of the bathroom, pulling the door shut behind me. My heart was doing frantic little jumps against my ribs. I tried recording it. I left my phone on the edge of the tub, recording audio, while I stayed in the hallway, doors slightly ajar. When I played it back later, all I got was faint static and the usual apartment building ambience. The humming, if it had been there, was too quiet for the microphone to catch. I googled sounds from drain pipes, humming noise in shower. I found articles about water pressure, sediment buildup, even pests. Nothing matched the intermittent, tune-like quality of what I was hearing. Nothing explained why it only happened late at night, or why it sounded so disturbingly deliberate. The worst time was last Tuesday. I woke up around 2 a.m. needing water. As I passed the closed bathroom door, I heard it. Louder than before. Still breathy, still fragmented, but undeniably there. That same broken little melody, looping endlessly. Driven by a mix of terror and desperate curiosity, I pushed the door open. The humming stopped instantly. Silence. Just the faint buzz of the bathroom fan I'd forgotten to turn off. I stood in the doorway, bathed in the dim light from the hallway. My eyes were locked on the shower drain grate. Slowly, deliberately, I started humming the tune myself, those 3 broken notes I now knew by heart. A beat of silence. Then, from the drain, came the exact same 3 notes, hummed back in that low, airy tone. I didn't scream. I couldn't. My breath seized in my chest. A coldness spread from my feet up my legs, sharp and paralyzing. I slammed the door shut, fumbled with the flimsy lock, and stumbled back to my bed. I didn't sleep. I sat huddled under the covers, listening to the silence, which now felt infinitely more threatening than the sound itself. I haven't heard it since I hummed back. It's been 3 nights of silence. But the silence isn't comforting. It feels like I've acknowledged something. Like I've answered a question I shouldn't have. Now, I shower with the door wide open, only in bright daylight. I avoid the bathroom completely after dark if I can help it. I've even started thinking about pouring bleach down the drain, or concrete, or just moving out. Because every time I look at that simple metal grate, I feel like something down there, in the darkness connecting my apartment to who knows where, is listening. Waiting. And I don't know if it stopped humming because I answered, or if it's just learning a new tune. The Whispering Walls of Blackwood Manor. Arthur Penhaligon fancied himself a rational man. An historian by trade, specializing in obscure local legends, he believed most ghost stories stemmed from creaky floorboards, overactive imaginations, or outright fabrication. That was before he inherited Blackwood Manor. The house stood on a windswept cliff overlooking a perpetually grey and turbulent sea, miles from the nearest village. It was a Gothic monstrosity of dark stone, sharp gables, and empty, staring windows, wreathed in ivy that seemed less like decoration and more like a shroud. His great-aunt Eleanor, a woman he barely remembered, eccentric, reclusive, had left it to him, lock, stock, and, as the local solicitor nervously hinted, barrel of rumored horrors. Arthur dismissed the solicitor's warnings. An isolated, atmospheric house was perfect. He needed solitude to finish his book on regional folklore. What better place than a house steeped in it? The first few days were unsettling, but predictably so. The sheer size of the place was oppressive. Corridors snaked away into gloom, doors remained stubbornly shut as if guarding secrets, and the wind howled around the eaves like a hungry wolf. Dust motes danced in the slivers of weak sunlight that penetrated the grimy windows. There were cold spots, sudden drafts that snuffed out candles, and the constant creaks and groans of an old structure settling. All perfectly explainable. He chose a large room on the second floor overlooking the sea as his study. It had a cavernous fireplace and floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, mostly empty now save for a few forgotten volumes bound in decaying leather. It was here, late one evening, amidst the scratching of his pen and the rhythmic crash of waves below, that he first heard it. A whisper. It was faint, almost subliminal, like the rustle of dry leaves or the sigh of the wind through a keyhole. He paused, listening. Silence, save for the storm outside. He shrugged it off. Nerves. The power of suggestion fueled by the solicitor's tales. But it came again the next night. And the night after. Soft, sibilant, seeming to emanate from the very walls around him. It was impossible to make out words, just the sound of speech, hushed and secretive. He checked the windows, the chimney flue, the adjoining rooms. Nothing. He tried to focus on his work, but the whispering became a persistent, insidious distraction. Sometimes it sounded like a single voice, other times like multiple voices murmuring in concert. He started sleeping poorly, his dreams filled with shifting shadows and indistinct figures beckoning him from dark corners. One afternoon, exploring the neglected west wing, a place even the weak sunlight shunned, he found a locked door at the end of a long, dust-choked hallway. It wasn't on the house plans he possessed. Curiosity piqued, he fetched a set of old keys found in a desk drawer. After several tries, a heavy iron key turned the protesting lock. The room inside was small, clearly a nursery once. Peeling wallpaper depicted faded cherubs and lambs. A single rocking horse stood frozen mid-rock in the center, coated in a thick layer of dust. But it was the small, leather-bound diary lying on a child-sized desk that drew his attention. The handwriting was looping and childlike. It belonged to a girl named Clara, who, according to the dates, lived here over a century ago. Arthur sat on the dusty floor, carefully turning the brittle pages. October 12th, Papa says the noises are just the wind. But the wind doesn't whisper my name. October 19th, the whispering is louder now. It comes from the walls. It tells me secrets. October 25th, it says it's lonely. It wants a friend. November 3rd, it doesn't like Mama and Papa. It says they want to take me away. It promises to keep me safe here. Forever. November 10th, it's angry today. The whispers are sharp. They hurt my ears. It doesn't want me to leave this room. The entries became more erratic, filled with childish drawings of distorted figures with hollow eyes lurking behind the walls. The last entry was a single, frantic sentence, barely legible. "It's coming out." A chill, colder than any draft he'd felt before, snaked up Arthur's spine. He slammed the diary shut, dust pluming around him. As he did, he heard it clearly for the first time, right beside his ear, a cold breath accompanying the sound. "Stay." Arthur scrambled back, heart hammering against his ribs. He fled the room, slamming the door shut and locking it, fumbling with the key in his haste. He leaned against the corridor wall, gasping for air. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't his imagination. That night, the activity escalated. The whispers were no longer confined to his study or the west wing, they seemed to follow him, slithering from the plaster, echoing down the hallways. Doors he knew he'd closed were found open. Objects shifted position, a book moved from the table to the floor, a chair turned slightly to face him. He felt constantly watched, the oppressive weight of unseen eyes pressing down on him. Sleep became impossible. When he did drift off, nightmares plagued him, Clara's distorted drawings coming to life, whispering figures peeling themselves from the wallpaper, their fingers elongated and grasping. He began to see things in the periphery of his vision, fleeting movements, shadows that detached themselves from corners and flowed like liquid darkness. He considered leaving. Packing his bags, abandoning the book, the inheritance, everything. But a morbid curiosity, mingled with a historian's stubborn desire for answers, and perhaps a nascent, terrifying influence from the house itself, kept him rooted. Who was Clara? What had happened to her? What was the entity in the walls? He delved into the house's history with renewed urgency, spending hours in the dusty local archives. He found scattered references to the Holloway family, who had lived in Blackwood Manor in the late 19th century. They had a young daughter named Clara. The records abruptly stopped. There was no mention of them moving, no death certificates. They had simply vanished. Local folklore, the kind Arthur usually debunked, spoke of the house swallowing them. Armed with this grim knowledge, Arthur felt a growing dread. He wasn't just in a haunted house, he was in a place that consumed its inhabitants. The whispers grew bolder, clearer. Sometimes they sounded like Clara, pleading for help. Other times, a deeper, rasping voice spoke, ancient and malevolent, promising knowledge, power, company. "We know your loneliness, Arthur. You seek stories, we have so many. Just listen, stay, become part of the walls." One stormy night, the wind battering the manor with gale-force fury and rain lashing against the windows like frantic fingers, the power failed. Plunged into near-total darkness, armed only with a flickering candle, Arthur felt the true presence of the house awaken. The whispering was deafening now, a cacophony of voices swirling around him, seeming to physically press in on him. Cold spots moved, chasing him through the rooms. He heard heavy footsteps pacing the floor above him, then running down the main staircase. He saw it then, not clearly, never clearly, but a tall, impossibly thin shadow detaching itself from the deeper darkness at the end of the hall, its form shifting and indistinct, stretching towards him. Panic seized him. He turned and ran, stumbling through the dark corridors, the candle flame dancing wildly, casting monstrous shadows. The whispers pursued him, clawing at his sanity. "Don't leave us. Become one." He burst into his study, slamming the door and fumbling to lock it. He backed away, holding the candle aloft, his eyes darting around the room. The whispering was inside the room with him, coming from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. "You belong here now, Arthur." The deep voice rasped, seeming to issue from the very stones of the fireplace. Then, the plaster on the wall beside the hearth began to crack. A fine web of fissures spread outwards, accompanied by a dry, scraping sound. Dust rained down. A section of the wall bulged, then crumbled inwards, revealing not brick or lath, but a cavity filled with suffocating darkness. From that void, the whispering intensified into a soul-chilling chorus. And Arthur felt, rather than saw, something begin to emerge, something ancient, formless, made of shadow and despair and the trapped essence of those who had come before. His rationality shattered. This was no legend, no psychological trick. It was real. It was hungry. With a strangled cry, Arthur threw his candle towards the emerging presence. It flared momentarily against the darkness before extinguishing, plunging the room into absolute blackness save for the wild lightning flashes outside. He didn't wait to see what happened. He wrenched the study door open and fled into the howling storm of the house. He didn't know how he made it out. He scrambled through hallways that seemed to shift and lengthen, past doors that opened and closed on their own, the cacophony of whispers chasing him like a physical force. He burst out the heavy front door into the raging storm, not stopping until he reached his car, parked some distance down the overgrown drive. He drove through the night, soaked and trembling, the whispers still echoing in his mind. He never looked back. Arthur Penhaligon never finished his book on local folklore. He moved far away, to a small, bright apartment in a busy city, always ensuring there was light and noise. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city slept and a profound silence fell, he thought he could hear it, a faint, sibilant sound, like dry leaves skittering across pavement. Or like a secret, being whispered just for him, from the memory of walls half a country away. He never felt truly alone again. And he knew, with chilling certainty, that Blackwood Manor still stood on its cliff, waiting, its walls patiently whispering, eager for the next listener. Story 1, The Echoes of St. Jude's Abandoned Hospital. Liam was an urban explorer, drawn to the skeletal remains of forgotten places. St. Jude's Hospital, closed for 30 years after funding dried up and whispers of malpractice grew too loud, was his Everest. Perched on a hill overlooking the town it once served, its broken windows stared like vacant eyes. Armed with flashlights, a camera, and a healthy dose of skepticism regarding the local ghost stories, Liam slipped through a gap in the boarded-up emergency entrance. The air inside was thick with the smell of decay, damp plaster, and something else, something metallic and faintly sweet, like old blood. Silence pressed in, heavy and unnatural, broken only by the scuttling of unseen things and the drip-drip-drip of water somewhere deep within. He moved through the decaying lobby, his flashlight beam cutting through the gloom, illuminating overturned gurneys and scattered papers yellowed with age. He found the old operating theater first. Stainless steel tables gleamed unervingly clean under a layer of dust. Shadows clung to the corners, seeming deeper than they should be. He felt a prickling sensation on his neck, the distinct feeling of being watched. He snapped a few photos, the flash momentarily banishing the oppressive dark, but the feeling lingered. Deeper he went, into the patient wards. Rows of empty beds lined the corridors, rusted frames groaning under imagined weight. In one room, a child's faded drawing lay on the floor, a stick-figure family under a lopsided sun. In another, a single, worn leather slipper sat by the bedside, as if its owner had just stepped out. It was these small, human remnants that unnerved him more than the silence. Then he heard it, the faint, rhythmic squeak of rubber wheels on linoleum. He froze, flashlight beam aimed down the long, dark corridor. Nothing. He held his breath, listening. Squeak, squeak, squeak. It was getting closer. He backed slowly into a doorway, heart pounding. A rusted four-stand rolled slowly out of the darkness, moving with impossible purpose, before bumping gently against the opposite wall and stopping. Coincidence? A draft? But there was no air movement. He pushed onward, drawn by a morbid curiosity towards the psychiatric wing, notoriously the most feared part of St. Jude's. Here, the atmosphere thickened, growing colder. Padded cells lined one hallway, their heavy doors hanging open, revealing bare, stained walls. Scratches marred the inside of one door, deep gouges near the floor. It was in the common room of the psych ward that things truly unraveled. A flickering began at the edge of his vision. He turned his flashlight towards it, an old television set, screen cracked, suddenly displaying static. Then, a shape resolved within the snow, a distorted face, mouth open in a silent scream. Liam stumbled back, dropping his flashlight. It rolled, casting wild, dancing shadows. As he fumbled for it, he heard a whisper, right beside his ear, cold and dry, "Help me." He scrambled up, light back in hand, shining it wildly. The TV screen was dark again. But now, the room didn't feel empty. He saw movement, a fleeting shadow darting behind a pillar, the sway of a bare lightbulb fixture that hadn't moved before. He heard shuffling feet, a low moan from one of the cells. He decided to leave. Enough was enough. But navigating the labyrinthine corridors in reverse proved difficult in his panicked state. He took a wrong turn, finding himself in the morgue. Stainless steel drawers lined the walls. One drawer was slightly ajar. Against his better judgment, he pulled it open. Empty. He let out a shaky breath of relief. Then, the drawer above it slid open silently on its own. And the one above that. One by one, the drawers opened, revealing their empty, shadowed depths. A wave of intense cold washed over him, carrying the scent of formaldehyde and something else, something rotten. He turned to run, but the heavy morgue door slammed shut with a deafening bang. He threw himself against it, but it wouldn't budge. Panic clawed at his throat. The whispers started again, swirling around him, dozens of voices overlapping, pleads, curses, cries of pain, the babble of the broken-minded. Shadows coalesced in the corners of the room, taking vaguely human shapes, their features indistinct but their eyes burning with cold, empty light. They drifted towards him, not walking, but floating, their spectral forms passing through the steel drawers. Liam pounded on the door, screaming until his voice was raw. The figures drew closer, their whispers intensifying, the cold becoming unbearable. He could feel their icy touch reaching for him, promising to make him another echo in the haunted halls of St. Jude's. Just as the first spectral hand brushed his cheek, the door behind him flew open, revealing the dark corridor beyond. He didn't hesitate. He bolted, not stopping, not looking back, until he burst out into the pre-dawn gray, collapsing onto the dew-soaked grass, the decaying scent of the hospital still clinging to him, the whispers forever etched into his memory. He never went urban exploring again. Underscore 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 underscore. Story 2, The Tithe of Oakhaven. Elara didn't believe in curses, but the village of Oakhaven tested her resolve. Nestled deep in an ancient, brooding forest, accessible only by a winding, single-lane road, it felt disconnected from the modern world. She was there researching local folklore for her thesis, specifically the legend of the Oakhaven Tithe. The villagers were polite but reserved, their eyes holding a watchful, weary quality. They spoke little of the tithe, dismissing it as an old wives' tale, a metaphor for hard winters. Yet, Elara noticed unsettling details, the heavy wooden shutters bolted tight every night, regardless of weather, the complete absence of dogs or cats in the village, the strange, carved symbols above every doorway, resembling intertwined branches forming a protective eye. Her host, the elderly town historian Mr. Abernathy, was more forthcoming, though his words were laced with caution. The tithe, he explained, his voice low, is an old pact. The forest provides good timber, plentiful game, fertile soil bordering its edges. But the forest, it demands a price. He wouldn't elaborate on the price, merely stating it ensured the village's prosperity and safety from what lies deep within the woods. As autumn deepened, the forest surrounding Oakhaven grew more imposing. The trees seemed darker, their branches more tangled, casting long, grasping shadows even at midday. A peculiar silence often fell, where even birdsong ceased. Elara felt constantly watched whenever she ventured near the tree line. Sometimes, she thought she saw movement in the deep shadows, something large, hunched, and unnaturally still. One evening, walking back from the archives near dusk, she heard a rustling in the undergrowth just off the path. Thinking it an animal, she shone her flashlight towards the sound. 2 points of pale, phosphorescent light blinked back at her from the darkness, low to the ground, before vanishing. Not the eyes of any deer or fox she knew. A shiver traced its way down her spine. The night before the first frost, traditionally the night of the tithe according to the fragmented texts she'd found, the tension in Oakhaven became palpable. Every villager was indoors well before sunset. The silence was absolute, heavier than ever. Mr. Abernathy urged her to stay inside, double-check the locks, and ignore any sounds she might hear. Curiosity warred with a growing sense of dread. From her attic window, overlooking the village square and the edge of the forest beyond, Elara watched. Around midnight, under a sliver moon, a figure emerged from the largest house, the mayor's residence. It was a young man, no older than 20, pale and trembling. He walked slowly, deliberately, towards the forest edge. No one else emerged. No one stopped him. He reached the tree-line and stood there, head bowed. Elara strained her eyes, peering into the blackness of the woods. At first, there was nothing. Then, the shadows seemed to deepen, coalesce. Something immense shifted between the trees, a formless bulk that defied easy description, all tangled roots and moss and damp earth, vaguely humanoid but grotesquely large, with those same pale, luminous eyes she'd seen before. It moved with a slow, dragging gait, accompanied by the sound of cracking branches and sucking mud. It reached the young man, who didn't flinch. A long, root-like appendage extended, touching his shoulder. He shuddered violently, then seemed to deflate, collapsing into a heap. The creature lingered over him for a moment, then retreated back into the impenetrable darkness of the forest, leaving no trace except the still form on the ground. Elara stifled a scream, pressing her hand against her mouth. The tithe wasn't symbolic. It was a sacrifice. The next morning, the village was quiet, but the oppressive tension had lifted slightly. The young man's body was gone. No one spoke of him. It was as if he had never existed. When Elara, shaken, confronted Mr. Abernathy, his eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "It is the way," he whispered. "The pact must be honored. One life ensures the survival of the many. The forest protects us, but its hunger is eternal." Elara packed her bags that day, her thesis forgotten. As she drove away from Oakhaven, she didn't look back, but she couldn't shake the image of those pale, luminous eyes, or the chilling understanding that some ancient thing still demanded the oldest price of all. The silence of the forest seemed to follow her for miles. Underscore 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 underscore. Story 3, Static Souls. Mark loved scavenging in junk shops. He found an old shortwave radio in a dusty corner of Yesterday's Treasures, a heavy, wood-cased behemoth with glowing vacuum tubes. The shopkeeper practically gave it away. Back in his cluttered apartment, Mark cleaned it up, replaced a frayed wire, and plugged it in. The tubes warmed with a soft orange glow, and after a moment of humming, the speaker crackled to life with static. He spent hours tuning the dial, catching snippets of foreign languages, Morse code, eerie atmospheric whistles. It was relaxing, a connection to a bygone era. Then, late one night, amidst the usual hiss and crackle, he landed on something different. A voice. It was faint, distorted, speaking English but with an odd, halting cadence. "Anyone there? Requesting contact. Is this frequency clear?" Mark, half joking, leaned towards the radio's built-in microphone. "Loud and clear." Who is this? Silence. Then, the voice returned, closer, clearer, tinged with static that sounded almost wet. Confirmation. Receiver identified. Unit 734 transmitting. We are searching. Mark frowned. Searching for what? What is Unit 734? Searching for resonance. For compatible vessels. Your signal is strong, receiver. A chill went down Mark's spine. This wasn't a normal broadcast. He tried to tune away, but the dial seemed stuck. The static intensified, swirling around the voice. We are fragmented. Dispersed. Seeking coherence. Seeking entry. Mark unplugged the radio. The tubes faded, the voice cutting off abruptly. He sat in a sudden silence, unnerved. It was probably just a prank, some pirate radio broadcast. But the way the voice had said, vessel. The next night, driven by a weird compulsion, he plugged it back in. The same frequency came alive instantly, no tuning needed. Receiver detected, the voice crackled, sounding pleased. Connection stabilizing. Your resonance is accommodating. Who are you? Mark demanded, fear mixing with morbid curiosity. We are the static between stations. The echoes in the wires. The lost signals. We were many. Now, less. We seek to be whole again. The voice paused. We see you, receiver. Through the oscillations. Through the electric pathways. Mark felt a sudden, sharp headache. The lights in his apartment flickered. He looked around nervously. Was it just the radio drawing power, or? Your space is limited, the voice continued, the static swirling like whispers. But sufficient for initial transference. Allow us access, receiver. Allow convergence. No. Get out of my radio. Mark yelled, reaching for the plug. The voice laughed, a sound like tearing fabric and breaking glass. The radio is merely the conduit, receiver. The signal is already received. We are in the wires. In the walls. In the potential. Mark yanked the plug. Silence. But this time, the silence felt wrong. Charged. He kept glancing at the dark speaker grill, the dead vacuum tubes. He had nightmares that night, dreams of drowning in static, of voices whispering from electrical sockets, of his own reflection flickering like a faulty screen. He decided to get rid of the radio. He took it outside to the dumpster, but as he lifted it, a jolt, like a powerful static shock, threw him backward. The radio landed on the pavement, unharmed. He tried again, and the same thing happened. It was as if the object refused to be discarded. Back inside, things escalated. Lights flickered constantly. Appliances turned on and off by themselves. Whispers seemed to emanate from the walls, from his computer speakers, even from his phone line, faint, distorted echoes of the radio voice. He felt a constant, low-level hum in his bones, a buzzing in his ears. One evening, staring at his reflection in the dark TV screen, his image flickered violently, replaced for a split second by a horrifying visage of merged, screaming faces, consumed by crackling static. He cried out, stumbling back. The radio sat on his workbench, unplugged, silent. Yet he knew it was the source. The conduit. He had to destroy it. He grabbed a hammer. As he approached, the tubes began to glow faintly, drawing power from nowhere. The static whisper started again, not from the speaker, but from inside his head. Too late, receiver. Connection established. We are converging. He brought the hammer down. The casing splintered, tubes shattered, wires sparked. But the static voice only laughed, louder now, echoing not just in his head, but in the room itself. The lights exploded. Darkness flooded the apartment, broken only by the eerie, residual glow from the shattered radio parts on the floor. And in that darkness, Mark felt a change within himself. A cold, electric tingling spread through his limbs. His thoughts became fragmented, interspersed with alien whispers and crackling energy. He looked at his hands, and they seemed to flicker, momentarily dissolving into static before reforming. He was still Mark. But he wasn't alone anymore. The signal had been received. The convergence had begun. He was the vessel now. And the static souls were finally finding coherence. Underscore 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 underscore. Story 4: The Lighthouse Keeper's Vigil. Thomas Sterling sought solitude, and the remote lighthouse known as the Devil's Tooth offered it in abundance. Perched on a jagged shard of rock miles off the storm-battered coast, it was accessible only by boat during rare calm seas. His predecessor had left abruptly, citing illusions brought on by isolation, the harbor master had explained with a dismissive wave. Thomas, a man weary of the noise and chaos of the mainland, welcomed the quiet. The first few weeks were peaceful, almost idyllic. The rhythmic sweep of the land, the crash of waves against the rocks below, the cry of gulls, it was a soothing symphony. He kept the logbook meticulously, maintained the lamp, read dusty novels left behind by generations of keepers. The first unsettling incident was minor. He heard footsteps on the metal stairs above him while he was in the kitchen galley. He called out, thinking perhaps the supply boat had arrived early. Silence. He climbed the winding stairs to the lamp room. Empty. The wind, he told himself, plays tricks in such a place. But the logbook held secrets. Tucked away in the back were entries from the previous keeper, Alastair Finch. Initially mundane, they grew increasingly erratic. October 12th, saw movement on the lower rocks again. Too large for a seal. Vanished when the light swept over it. October 19th, the singing, faint, at high tide. Not gulls. Something else. October 25th, it taps on the glass at night now. Wants in. November 3rd, locked myself in the lamp room. Can hear it scraping on the stone below. How does it climb? The last entry, dated November 5th, was a single, jagged word, open. A chill unrelated to the sea air settled over Thomas. He tried to dismiss Finch's writings as madness induced by solitude, exactly what the harbor master had said. Yet, he started noticing things himself. Flickering shapes in his peripheral vision as he scanned the waves. A recurring patch of unnatural stillness on the water, even amidst churning seas. And sometimes, carried on the wind, a faint, discordant melody that seemed both beautiful and deeply wrong. One stormy night, the waves crashed violently against the tower, spray reaching the lamp room glass. The wind howled like a banshee. Amidst the cacophony, Thomas heard it, a distinct, rhythmic tap, tap, tapping on the thick glass of the lantern room, dozens of feet above the raging sea. He froze, peering out into the tempest. The beam swept past, illuminating nothing but spray and darkness. But the tapping continued, patient, persistent. He backed away from the glass, heart hammering. How could anything be out there? Sleep became elusive. He felt constantly watched. He started talking to himself, catching his own reflection in the polished brass and feeling a jolt of unfamiliarity. Was the isolation getting to him, just like Finch? Or was Finch's warning real? He began seeing it more clearly during storms, a tall, gaunt figure clinging impossibly to the wet rocks below, humanoid but disturbingly elongated, with limbs that bent at unnatural angles. Its head seemed overlarge, featureless save for what looked like wide, dark eyes that stared fixedly up at the light. Whenever the beam swept over it, it would flinch or seem to dissolve momentarily into the spray, only to reform when the light passed. One particularly violent storm trapped him for days. The generator sputtered and died, plunging the lighthouse into near darkness, save for the emergency battery backup for the lamp itself. The tapping returned, louder now, more insistent, coming not just from the lamp room glass, but from the lower windows, the heavy wooden entrance door. It was accompanied by a low, guttural scraping sound against the stone exterior. Thomas huddled in the relative safety of the lamp room, clutching a heavy wrench. The discordant singing surrounded the tower now, weaving through the howl of the wind, somehow penetrating the thick stone walls. It burrowed into his mind, promising release from the solitude, companionship in the cold depths. He found himself drawn to the glass, peering down. The figure was there, clinging to the wall just below the walkway, its featureless face tilted upwards. Its dark eyes seemed to bore into his soul. It raised a long, skeletal hand and tapped again on the glass, a gesture that was almost beckoning. Thomas felt a terrifying urge to unlock the lantern room door, to go outside onto the narrow walkway, to see what it wanted, perhaps even to join it in the churning abyss below. He fought the impulse, squeezing his eyes shut, focusing on the rhythmic sweep of the lamp, the only source of order in the chaos. When dawn finally broke, the storm had subsided. The sea was calmer, the sky clearing. The tapping and singing were gone. Thomas cautiously descended the stairs. The heavy entrance door was scratched and dented from the outside, as if something had desperately tried to force its way in. He radioed the harbor master, his voice trembling, demanding immediate evacuation. He didn't care about the contract or the solitude anymore. When the boat finally arrived, Thomas didn't look back at the Devil's Tooth. But even back on the mainland, surrounded by people and noise, he could sometimes hear, faint and distant, the sound of tapping on glass, and the discordant melody of the deep. The solitude he sought had been replaced by a haunting presence he could never truly escape. Underscore 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 underscore. Story 5, The Bloom Beneath. Dr. Eris Thorne was a biologist with a penchant for the unexplored. When a mining company accidentally broke through into a previously unknown cave system deep beneath the Appalachian Mountains, Eris jumped at the chance to be among the first scientists allowed in. The miners reported strange phosphorescent fungi and an unusual, pervasive dampness. Equipped with spelunking gear and sample containers, Eris descended into the earth. The newly blasted entrance gave way to cathedral-like caverns dripping with stalactites. The air was cool, thick with the scent of wet earth and ozone. Deeper in, he found what the miners described, patches of bioluminescent fungi clinging to the walls, casting an ethereal, sickly green glow. They pulsed faintly, rhythmically, like slow heartbeats. But there was another type of growth, one the miners hadn't mentioned, perhaps because it wasn't glowing. In a lower, damper chamber, fed by a sluggish underground stream, Eris found thick, fleshy, mushroom-like structures unlike anything he'd ever seen. They were a pale, veiny white, resembling bloated hands reaching from the mud. They felt strangely warm to the touch. Intrigued, he carefully took a small sample, sealing it in a sterile container. As he explored further, he noticed the pulsing green fungi seemed to grow around the strange white structures, almost protectively. He also found odd, perfectly spherical nodules embedded in the cave walls, smooth and dark like obsidian eggs. He pocketed one, curious. Back in his makeshift lab at the surface camp, Eris examined the white sample under a microscope. Its cellular structure was bizarre, exhibiting properties of both fungal and animal life. While observing it, he accidentally pricked his finger on a sharp edge of the container. A minuscule droplet of the sample's internal fluid wicked into the cut. He cleaned it, bandaged it, thought nothing of it. That night, his sleep was plagued by vivid, disturbing dreams. He dreamt he was back in the cave, but the white growths were moving, writhing, reaching for him. He felt roots burrowing into his skin, merging with his veins. He woke up sweating, his bandaged finger throbbing. Over the next few days, Eris felt strange. A persistent, low-grade fever. An odd, earthy taste in his mouth. The small cut on his finger wasn't healing, instead, the skin around it had taken on a pale, slightly translucent quality, with faint, vein-like patterns appearing beneath the surface. He dismissed it as a reaction, perhaps an infection from the cave environment. He continued his research, but his focus wavered. He felt an inexplicable pull back towards the cave, especially the chamber with the white growths. He started noticing the obsidian-like nodule he'd pocketed pulsing with a faint, internal light, synchronized with the green fungi in the photos he'd taken. His physical symptoms worsened. The pale, veiny pattern spread up his arm. He felt sluggish, yet strangely energized, needing less sleep. He developed a sensitivity to sunlight, preferring the dim light of his lab. He examined his own blood under the microscope, and saw microscopic filaments, disturbingly similar to the structure of the white growth, moving within it. Panic began to set in. This wasn't just an infection, it was a transformation. The sample he took, the entity it represented, it was parasitic, invasive. He realized the green fungi weren't protective, they were likely a warning, or perhaps symbiotic with the dominant white growth. The bloom, as he started calling it in his frantic notes, was spreading inside him. He tried to destroy the original sample, but as he approached it, a wave of nausea and a sharp, piercing pain in his head stopped him. It felt like the organism knew his intent, defended itself through their connection. He noticed the obsidian nodule glowed brighter when he felt this resistance. Was it a communication device? A control node? His skin grew paler, clammy, taking on the texture of damp earth. He felt roots, thin tendrils, spreading beneath his skin, anchoring him. His thoughts became muddled, interspersed with alien impulses, a desire for darkness, for dampness, for the cool embrace of the deep earth. He felt a connection to the cave, to the bloom, growing stronger daily. He knew he had to warn someone, destroy the cave entrance, prevent this thing from reaching the surface. But another part of him, the part that was no longer entirely Eris, resisted. It whispered of communion, of becoming part of something vast, ancient, and patient beneath the earth. His last coherent journal entry read, "The bloom is taking hold. It calls itself //us//1. Wants to spread. Surface world is dry, harsh. Needs // we need // to make it suitable. Bring the deep earth, up." Finger almost fully changed. Hand, next. Must, resist. Or, welcome. When the mining company sent a team to check on the overdue Dr. Thorne, they found his lab empty. His notes were scattered, detailing his terrifying transformation. They ventured cautiously back into the cave system. They found Eris in the chamber of white growths. He stood motionless in the center, pale and bloated, his skin merged with the fleshy, hand-like structures erupting from the mud. His eyes were open but milky white, unseeing. Faint green fungi pulsed on his body. He was part of the bloom now, another nutrient source, another anchor for the ancient life form waiting patiently in the dark. As the miners watched in horror, one of the white hands connected to Eris slowly turned, its veinous surface rippling, and seemed to beckon them closer into the pulsing, subterranean garden. Underscore 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 underscore. The reflection in Ryder's antique shop. Clara loved antiques, the sense of history clinging to forgotten objects. Ryder's curiosity shop, crammed floor to ceiling with dusty furniture, odd trinkets, and faded portraits, was her favorite haunt. One rainy Tuesday, tucked away in a dark corner behind a stack of hatboxes, she found it, a large, ornate standing mirror, its silvered frame tarnished but intricately carved with strange, flowing symbols that weren't quite floral, not quite anything recognizable. Mr. Ryder, the shop's ancient, roomy-eyed owner, seemed uneasy when she asked about it. That one? Came from the old Blackwood estate auction. Been here years. Gives folks the creeps, most say. He offered it to her for a ridiculously low price, almost eager to be rid of it. Clara, charmed by its Gothic elegance and undeterred by vague warnings, bought it immediately. Getting it back to her small apartment was a struggle, but she finally managed to set it up in her bedroom, opposite her bed. It dominated the room, its dark glass reflecting the familiar space in a slightly distorted, unnerving way. The first oddity was subtle. She'd glance at the mirror and catch a flicker of movement in the reflection when nothing in the room had moved. A shadow darting past, a curtain seeming to sway when the window was closed. She blamed tired eyes, the play of light. Then, her reflection started acting strangely. Sometimes, it seemed delayed by a fraction of a second, her mirrored self lagging behind her actual movements. Other times, while she was sitting still, reading, she'd glance up and see her reflection blink or shift its gaze slightly before snapping back into place. It was deeply unsettling, that feeling of her own image having a subtle life of its own. One night, she woke suddenly, feeling watched. She looked towards the mirror. In the dim moonlight filtering through the window, her reflection sat bolt upright in the mirrored bed, staring directly at her with wide, dark eyes, even though Clara herself was still lying down. Her heart leaped into her throat. She squeezed her eyes shut, then opened them again. The reflection was back to normal, mimicking her prone position. A dream? Sleep paralysis? She started researching the Blackwood estate. The family had a dark history, plagued by disappearances, madness, and rumors of dabbling in forbidden arts. The mirror was mentioned in a few obscure local histories, referred to as the soul trap or looker's glass, rumored to capture not just images, but something more. The phenomena escalated. Whispers seemed to emanate from the mirror's surface, too faint to understand but undeniably present. Objects near the mirror would be moved slightly overnight, her hairbrush shifted, a book placed face down. The air around it grew noticeably colder. One evening, standing before it, brushing her teeth, her reflection suddenly smiled, a wide, predatory grin that didn't touch its eyes, while Clara's own face remained neutral. She dropped her toothbrush, backing away in horror. The reflection's smile faded, replaced by her own terrified expression. She tried covering the mirror with a sheet, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The whispers grew louder, seeming to come from behind the sheet. She'd wake to find the sheet pulled partially aside, as if the reflection had peeked out during the night. Desperate, she decided to get rid of it. She called a friend, Mark, to help her move it. As they tried to lift it, the mirror felt impossibly heavy, far heavier than it should have been. The carved symbols on the frame felt icy cold to the touch. As they maneuvered it towards the door, Clara glanced at the reflection. She saw herself and Mark struggling with the mirror, but behind them, standing in the reflected doorway, was a tall, shadowy figure with indistinct features and hollow eyes. There was nothing in the actual doorway. "Did you see that?" she gasped, letting go. Mark hadn't seen anything. That night, terrified, Clara slept on the sofa. Around 3 a.m., she was woken by a soft, insidious sound from the bedroom, her own voice, humming a gentle tune. But it wasn't her. She crept to the bedroom door and peered in. The mirror stood uncovered. Bathed in moonlight, her reflection stood before it, facing into the room. It wasn't mimicking her, it was moving independently, slowly turning, its eyes scanning the room. It hummed that soft, eerie tune. Then, its eyes locked onto the doorway, onto Clara. It smiled again, that same terrifyingly wide grin. It raised a hand, beckoning her forward. "Come closer," it whispered, its voice a perfect imitation of Clara's, yet subtly wrong, cold, hollow. "It's lonely in the glass. Let's trade places. Just for a little while." Clara screamed and slammed the door shut. She spent the rest of the night huddled on the sofa, listening to the faint humming and occasional soft footsteps from the locked bedroom. The next day, she didn't try to move it. She didn't call anyone. She went out and bought the heaviest hammer she could find. Ignoring the whispers that now seemed to fill her apartment, ignoring the cold dread pooling in her stomach, she went into the bedroom. Her reflection watched her approach, its expression shifting from a mocking smile to one of dawning horror. Clara swung the hammer with all her might. The mirror exploded in a shower of dark, silvered glass. A piercing shriek, echoing with multiple voices, erupted from the shattering surface, then abruptly cut off. Silence. The coldness in the room dissipated. The feeling of being watched vanished. Trembling, Clara swept up the shards, carefully wrapping them and disposing of them far away. Her apartment finally felt normal again. But sometimes, when she caught her reflection unexpectedly, in a shop window, a polished tabletop, even a puddle on the street, she would see, just for a fleeting instant, a flicker behind her own eyes. A hint of a predatory smile. A momentary lag in movement. The mirror was broken, but she couldn't shake the terrifying feeling that a tiny shard of the looker's glass, and whatever dwelled within it, had embedded itself deep inside her. Underscore 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 underscore. Pressure point. The deep-sea submersible, Nereus, was humanity's most ambitious attempt to pierce the secrets of the Mariana Trench. Dr. Eva Rostova, veteran oceanographer, led the three-person crew, Jian Li, brilliant engineer and pilot, and Ben Carter, geologist and comms specialist. Their mission, reach the Challenger Deep and explore a newly detected anomaly, an area showing impossible geometric readings on sonar. The descent was smooth, the submersible cocooning them in relative comfort against the crushing pressure outside. Hours passed as they sank through layers of darkness, past bizarre bioluminescent creatures that flashed like alien constellations. Eva monitored the readings, Jian expertly navigated the currents, and Ben maintained contact with the surface vessel, the Trident. As they neared the target depth, almost 7 miles down, the sonar lit up. Not with the expected rocky terrain, but with clear, defined lines, right angles, arches, structures that looked undeniably artificial, spread across the abyssal plain. Excitement warred with disbelief. "Confirm readings," Eva ordered, her voice tight. "Confirmed, Eva," Ben replied, his voice strained. "Sonar is clear. It looks like ruins." "Impossible." Jian maneuvered the Nereus closer, its powerful external lights cutting through the eternal night. What they saw stole their breath. Vast, cyclopean structures of non-reflective black stone rose from the seabed. The architecture was alien, non-Euclidean, with angles that seemed to twist the eye and surfaces that swallowed the light. No silt covered them, despite their apparent age. Strange, carved patterns, unlike any human script, adorned the massive blocks. "Comms are getting choppy," Ben reported, fiddling with his console. "Heavy interference down here. Trident can barely hear us." As they navigated through the silent, underwater city, an oppressive feeling settled over the crew. It wasn't just the physical pressure outside, it was a psychic weight, a sense of profound antiquity and slumbering intelligence. Eva felt a throbbing headache begin behind her eyes. Jian complained of disorientation. Picking up movement, Ben said suddenly, pointing at a sonar screen. Multiple contacts, large, moving erratically around the periphery. Eva strained her eyes, peering through the thick viewport. The lights illuminated only black water and the imposing structures. Life forms? At this depth? Impossible. They aren't showing up on thermal, Jian noted, his knuckles white on the controls. And they're moving, wrong. The interference intensified. Comms with the trident cut out completely, replaced by a low, guttural static that seemed to resonate within the submersible's hull. The headache Eva felt worsened, accompanied by fleeting, nightmarish images flashing behind her eyelids, vast, tentacled shapes moving in utter blackness, impossible geometries folding in on themselves. Eva, look! Ben cried, pointing to the main viewport. A shadow detached itself from one of the monolithic structures. It was immense, its form shifting and indistinct, absorbing the Nereus's lights. It wasn't swimming, it was simply moving, propelled by forces beyond comprehension. It lacked discernible features, yet Eva felt an overwhelming sense of being seen, scrutinized by an intelligence ancient beyond imagining. Alarms blared. Hull integrity compromised. Microfractures detected. Jian yelled, fighting the controls as the submersible shuddered violently. Something's exerting pressure. The psychic weight became unbearable. Ben clawed at his temples, screaming incoherently. Jian's eyes rolled back in his head for a moment before he shook himself violently, trying to pilot them away. Eva fought waves of nausea and terror, the alien thoughts and images flooding her mind threatening to shatter her sanity. She saw glimpses of cosmic entities, of dying stars, of truths humanity was never meant to comprehend. The giant shadow flowed towards them, engulfing the submersible. The external lights flickered and died, plunging them into absolute darkness, save for the red emergency lighting inside. The hull groaned, metal shrieking under unimaginable stress. The guttural static filled the cabin, seeming to emanate from everywhere and nowhere at once. Through the viewport, Eva saw impossible things swirl in the darkness, eyes made of cold void, tendrils that defied physics, glimpses of a reality utterly alien and hostile. She felt her mind fraying, the pressure building not just outside, but inside her skull. Jian, with a final, desperate effort, managed to activate the emergency ascent ballasts. The Nereus shot upwards, tearing free from the crushing darkness and the suffocating presence. But the damage was done. They surfaced hours later, adrift, the Nereus battered almost beyond recognition. Ben was catatonic, staring blankly, occasionally whispering fragments of impossible equations. Jian was conscious but severely traumatized, refusing to speak of what happened below. Eva, though physically intact, felt forever changed, haunted by the cosmic horrors she'd glimpsed. Their debriefings were classified at the highest level. The official reports cited equipment malfunction and extreme pressure psychosis. But Eva knew the truth. They had stumbled upon something ancient, powerful, and utterly inimical to human understanding, slumbering in the deepest, darkest corner of the world. They had touched the pressure point, and it had pushed back. She spent the rest of her life looking at the stars, wondering what other ancient impossibilities lay waiting, not just in the depths, but out there, in the infinite, crushing dark. Underscore 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 underscore. The melody of Marionette Lane. When Leo inherited his estranged grandmother's house on Marionette Lane, he expected dust, faded photographs, and maybe some quirky antiques. He didn't expect the music box. He found it tucked away in a cedar chest in the attic, a beautiful porcelain piece depicting a ballerina frozen mid-pirouette. He wound the small key. A delicate, haunting melody filled the dusty air, simple, childlike, yet tinged with an undeniable sadness. He placed it on the mantelpiece in the living room, a nostalgic curiosity. That night, he was jolted awake by the faint strains of its melody drifting up the stairs. He went down, thinking he must have left it partially wound. The box was closed, silent. Strange. He shrugged it off, blaming the creaks and groans of the old house. But it happened again the next night. And the night after. Always around 3 a.m., the soft, melancholic tune would play for a minute or two, then stop. Leo tried locking the box away in a drawer, but he still heard the music, muffled but unmistakable, emanating from the wood. He started researching the house's history, asking neighbors about his grandmother, a woman he barely knew. He learned she had a younger sister, Lily, who died tragically in the house as a child, a fall down the main staircase, decades ago. Lily, they said, had adored ballet and owned a cherished ballerina music box. A cold dread began to creep into Leo's thoughts. Was it just an old mechanism prone to malfunctioning? Or was something else at play? The phenomena grew bolder. Small objects near the music box would be slightly moved overnight, a figurine turned, a photograph knocked over. He'd catch fleeting glimpses of movement out of the corner of his eye, especially near the staircase, a flash of white, like a small dress disappearing around the corner. The air in the house grew heavy, sorrowful. He started having nightmares. Dreams of a little girl in a white dress, dancing endlessly to the music box melody in the dimly lit living room. Her face was always obscured by shadow, but he felt her sadness, her loneliness. Sometimes, in the dream, she would stop dancing and turn towards him, beckoning him to join her. One afternoon, while reading downstairs, he heard a distinct giggle from the top of the staircase. He froze. It sounded like a child. "Hello?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. Silence. He slowly climbed the stairs, peering down the hallway. Nothing. But the top step felt unnaturally cold. He decided he'd had enough. He took the music box outside, intending to smash it. But as he raised it, a wave of intense sadness washed over him, so profound it brought tears to his eyes. A child's whisper seemed to echo in his mind, "Don't break it, it's all I have left." He couldn't do it. He brought the box back inside, placing it back on the mantelpiece with shaking hands. That night, the music played longer, louder. And it wasn't just music. He heard soft weeping accompanying the melody. Driven by a mixture of fear and a strange sense of pity, Leo went downstairs. The living room was icy cold. The music box was open, the ballerina spinning slowly. And standing beside it, bathed in moonlight from the window, was the figure of a little girl. She was pale, translucent, dressed in a ragged white dress. Her face was clearer now, tear-streaked, with large, sorrowful eyes that fixed on Leo. It was Lily. "It hurts," she whispered, her voice like rustling leaves. "I fell." Mama was angry. Always angry. Leo stood rooted to the spot, unsure whether to flee or speak. "Dance with me?" Lily asked, holding out a small, ethereal hand. The music swelled slightly. "It's lonely dancing alone. Stay and dance. Forever." Her eyes, though sad, held a possessive glint now. Leo realized the sadness was a lure. This wasn't just a lost spirit, it was a trapped one, desperate for company, willing to pull someone else into her lonely, endless loop. The music box wasn't just a memento, it was an anchor, binding her to the house, to her final moments. "I can't, Lily," Leo said softly but firmly, backing away towards the door. "You need to move on." Lily's face crumpled, then hardened. The sadness shifted to a cold anger. "No. Don't leave me. Stay. Stay." The room temperature plummeted. Objects rattled on the shelves. The music box melody became distorted, jarring, screeching. Lily lunged towards him, her form flickering, her hands reaching, no longer beckoning but grasping. Leo turned and ran, bursting out the front door into the night, the distorted music and Lily's enraged screams chasing him down Marionette Lane. He never went back into the house. He sold it dirt cheap to a development company, warning them to tear it down completely and dispose of the contents carefully. He moved far away, trying to forget the house, the music box, the sad, angry ghost of Lily. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the world is quiet, he thinks he can still hear it, a faint, melancholic melody playing just at the edge of his hearing, a reminder of the lonely dancer forever trapped on Marionette Lane. Underscore 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 underscore. The murk below. The Blackridge mine burrowed deeper than any other in the region, chasing a rich vein of coal deep into the earth's crust. Ronan was part of the pioneer crew, tasked with blasting and securing new tunnels at the deepest level, nearly 2 miles down. It was dangerous, claustrophobic work, but the pay was good. They broke through into a new section unlike any they'd encountered before. Not solid rock, but a network of natural caverns filled with thick, black, viscous slime and pockets of flammable, foul-smelling gas. The air was heavy, unnaturally warm, and carried a deep, low-frequency hum that vibrated in their bones. "What is this stuff?" grumbled Mac, Ronan's grizzled crewmate, poking the slime with a boot. It clung like tar, sucking greedily at his boot before slowly releasing it. Their foreman, Davis, shone his helmet lamp around. "Geological anomaly. Just means more shoring up. Watch the gas pockets. Let's get to work." But strange things started happening almost immediately. Tools left for a moment would be coated in the thick slime when they turned back. Strange echoes followed their movements, sounding like skittering claws on rock, always seeming to come from just beyond the range of their lamps. The low hum intensified intermittently, causing headaches and nausea. Then, young Jimmy vanished. 1 minute he was securing timber supports at the edge of the explored cavern, the next he was gone. No cry, no sound of struggle. Just empty space where he'd been standing, his helmet lamp lying on the slimy floor, still lit, pointing towards an unexplored fissure in the rock face, too small for a man to fit through. Panic began to ripple through the crew. Davis ordered a search, but the fissure yielded nothing but more slime and the oppressive hum. They retreated back to the main shaft access point, shaken. Davis radioed the surface, reporting the accident, downplaying the strange circumstances. Confined to the safer, established tunnels while awaiting instructions, the remaining crew grew increasingly unnerved. The skittering sounds became bolder, closer. Shadows seemed to writhe at the edge of their light beams. The air grew thicker, the smell more pungent, decay, ammonia, and something else, primal and predatory. Ronan was checking a pressure gauge when he saw it. For just a second, his lamp illuminated a section of tunnel further down. Something pale and vaguely humanoid, but far too thin, with limbs bent at impossible angles, clung upside down to the ceiling. It moved with blinding speed, scuttling back into the darkness the instant the light touched it. It had no discernible eyes, just a gaping, vertical maw filled with needle-like teeth. He cried out, stumbling back. Mac and Davis rushed over. "What is it, Ronan?" "I saw something. Up there. Fast. Pale." Davis shone his powerful lamp down the tunnel. "Nothing but rock and shadow. Nerves, son. This place, it gets to you." Jimmy's disappearance. But Ronan knew what he saw. And Mac looked uneasy too. "Heard something earlier," Mac muttered. "Like wet cloth tearing. Came from that direction." Their attempt to return to the surface was thwarted. A sudden, violent tremor shook the mine, not like a typical seismic event, but like something colossal shifting deep below. Rocks rained down, sealing the main access tunnel. They were trapped. Their radios crackled, then died. Emergency lights flickered, casting long, dancing shadows. The skittering sound surrounded them now, echoing from multiple directions in the darkness beyond their helmet lamps. The low hum became a nauseating thrum that resonated deep within their chests. They retreated deeper into the established tunnels, looking for an alternative shaft, a ventilation duct, anything. They moved as a group, back to back, lamps cutting cones of light into the oppressive black. A scream echoed from the back of the group. They spun around. Another miner, Cortez, was gone, dragged silently into a side tunnel choked with the black slime. Only his helmet remained, rolling slowly to a stop. Panic erupted. They ran, blindly, deeper into the labyrinthine mine. Ronan could hear the things chasing them, wet, slapping sounds, rapid skittering, clicks and guttural hisses that scraped against his sanity. He saw Mac dragged down by a pale limb that shot out from a crack in the wall, vanishing with a sickening, wet crunch. He saw Davis, trying to make a stand with a rock pick, overwhelmed by 3 of the creatures that swarmed him from the shadows, their needle teeth flashing. Ronan ran alone, fueled by pure terror. He stumbled into a vast cavern, the source of the hum. In the center, half submerged in a lake of the black slime, was something immense, pulsating, a grotesque, fleshy mass covered in weeping eyes and writhing tendrils. The pale creature scuttled around its base, seeming to tend to it, or worship it. It was the heart of the nest, the mother thing they had disturbed. One of the pale hunters spotted him. It shrieked, a high-pitched sound that pierced his eardrums, and lunged. Ronan didn't think, he scrambled up a pile of loose rock, finding a narrow ventilation shaft barely wide enough to squeeze into. He clawed his way upwards, the creature's shrieks echoing below, the sounds of its attempts to follow him horrifyingly close. He climbed for what felt like hours, scraped raw, dehydrated, his mind reeling. Finally, miraculously, he saw a faint light. He emerged through a grate into an older, abandoned section of the mine, much closer to the surface. Ronan was the only survivor. The official story was a catastrophic mine collapse due to unstable geology and gas pockets. Blackridge Mine was sealed, condemned, filled with concrete. But Ronan knew the truth. They hadn't just found coal, they'd broken into something else, something ancient and alive, sleeping in the warm, dark quay below. And he couldn't shake the terrifying thought that sealing the mine hadn't trapped the creatures, it had merely contained them, for now. He knew, with chilling certainty, that they were still down there, waiting, multiplying in the slime and the dark. Underscore 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 underscore. Lessons at Lockwell Academy. Lockwell Academy stood derelict on a windswept hill, its Gothic architecture silhouetted against perpetually grey skies. Closed for 50 years after a funding scandal and persistent rumors of student abuse under its infamous headmaster, Dr. Alastair Finch, no relation to the lighthouse keeper, though the name echoed ominously, it was now slated for demolition. Sarah, a historical preservation consultant, was tasked with one final survey, documenting any architectural features worth salvaging before the wrecking ball struck. The moment she stepped inside the grand, echoing entrance hall, a profound chill settled over her. Not just the physical cold of a long-abandoned building, but a heavy, oppressive atmosphere thick with lingering sorrow and fear. Dust motes danced in the weak light filtering through grimy arched windows. The silence was absolute, yet felt expectant. She moved through the classrooms first. Desks still sat in neat rows, covered in thick dust. Faded chalk lingered on blackboards, hinting at lessons interrupted mid-sentence. In one room, she found a single, small leather shoe tucked beneath a desk. In another, unsettlingly deep scratches marred the surface of a heavy oak teacher's desk. The dormitories were even more unsettling. Small, Spartan rooms lined long, dark corridors. Iron-framed beds stood like skeletal remains. Sarah found faded graffiti scratched into walls, names, dates, desperate pleas like, "Help me," and "Finch sees all." The air here was colder, carrying a faint, unpleasant odor, stale sweat and something vaguely metallic. She documented ornate plasterwork, carved banisters, and stained glass windows depicting stern-faced scholars. But her attention kept being drawn to the headmaster's office on the top floor. The door was heavy oak, imposing. It was unlocked. Inside, the room was preserved as if Dr. Finch had just stepped out. A massive desk dominated the space, behind it a tall leather chair. Bookshelves lined the walls, filled with imposing, leather-bound volumes. On the desk lay a heavy, black ruler and an old admissions ledger, open to a page from the 1950s. Sarah felt an overwhelming sense of dread, the feeling of being watched intensifying tenfold. She quickly took her photos and measurements, eager to leave the room. As she turned to go, she heard it, the distinct sound of the heavy leather chair creaking, as if someone had just settled into it. She spun around. The chair was still, empty. But the indentation in the leather cushion looked fresh. As dusk began to gather outside, the academy seemed to awaken. Sarah heard faint whispers echoing down the corridors, too indistinct to understand. The sound of distant, muffled weeping drifted from one of the empty dorm rooms. Doors she knew she'd left open were found closed, doors she'd closed were slightly ajar. Cold spots moved through the building, brushing against her skin like an icy touch. In the old gymnasium, she heard the rhythmic thud of a bouncing ball, but the vast room was empty, the floor thick with undisturbed dust. In the deserted library, books would occasionally tumble from shelves without provocation. Drawn by a morbid compulsion, she returned to the headmaster's office. The heavy black ruler was no longer on the desk, it lay on the floor near the door, as if dropped or thrown. As she bent to pick it up, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening bang, plunging the room into near darkness. Panic flared. She fumbled for the doorknob, but it wouldn't turn. It was locked from the outside. Then, she heard breathing in the room with her, slow, deliberate, ragged breaths emanating from the direction of the headmaster's chair. "Who's there?" Sarah whispered, her voice shaking. A low chuckle answered her, cold and devoid of humor. "Late for lessons, are we?" The voice was cultured, laced with cruel authority. Discipline must be maintained. A tall, shadowy figure detached itself from the darkness around the chair. It was vaguely humanoid but elongated, distorted, its features obscured save for the glint of what might have been spectacles. It held something long and thin in its hand, the black ruler. "Naughty children require correction," the figure rasped, gliding towards her. Sarah screamed, pounding on the locked door. She could hear the figure approaching, the soft swish of the ruler cutting through the air. She felt an unnatural coldness envelop her, the smell of old paper and something else, fear. Just as the figure reached her, the doorknob rattled violently from the outside, and the door flew open, revealing the dimly lit corridor. Sarah didn't hesitate. She scrambled out, not daring to look back, slamming the heavy door shut behind her. She leaned against it, gasping, heart hammering. She fled Lockwell Academy, not stopping until she reached her car, parked far down the overgrown drive. She filed her report, omitting the terrifying encounter but strongly recommending immediate demolition. The demolition crew faced unusual problems, equipment malfunctions, inexplicable accidents, workers complaining of unease and hearing strange noises. But eventually, Lockwell Academy was reduced to rubble. Sarah moved on, but the experience left its mark. Sometimes, in quiet moments, she would hear faint whispers or the distant sound of weeping. And occasionally, she'd feel a sudden, inexplicable chill, accompanied by the terrifying sensation of cold eyes watching her, and the phantom sting of a ruler across her knuckles. The lessons of Lockwell Academy, it seemed, were not easily forgotten.